Marianne Murphy, are you ready?
Hey guys, welcome to Dear Frannie. I'm so excited to be joined by Marianne and Marcia. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a bit, but first, I am your host, Catherine LeBlanc. I serve as a fractional chief marketing officer for a number of brands in the franchise space, and I am excited to chat with Marianne and Marcia about our questions today. So, Marcia, I'll let you go first to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Excellent. Thank you for having me, Catherine. I'm Marcia Mead with M Squared Franchise Consulting. We offer boutique style fractional franchise development support to franchise home office teams. And I have been in franchising since I was 25 years old. Quite a season in franchising, and I love our industry so much because I love to watch franchise owners' dreams come true.
Awesome. Marianne, tell us more about you.
Marianne Murphy, Franchise Pulse, a 36-year veteran of the franchise industry, predominantly home services, which I love. Nothing is more fun than when the franchisee is, that close to the consumer, which is always a great model to watch grow. And I am currently a fractional integrator or fractional COO. And I partner with franchise visionaries and founders in the emerging space, small brands looking to jump to that next level or really organize their visions and their dreams into an actual plan that's going to move their franchise business forward.
Awesome. Well, I got some powerhouses to talk to us today. I think that the questions we have lined up are certainly going to be appropriate for this group. So excited to dig in. But first, we're going to start with our hot takes. So we were chatting a little bit before we started recording, and I'm excited to hear Marcia's first. So I'm going to let her go first.
Oh boy. All right. So I'm probably going to take some heat from my friends in the franchise development world for this, but we did say hot takes are supposed to be a little spicy, right?
That's right.
So, all right. So my hot take is that brand dilution can harm the success of franchises.
Well, tell me, okay, so break it down. What does delusion mean?
Yeah. So dilution, not
Okay.
delusion. Just to be
Good,
clear,
good point.
I don't think the franchisors are delusional. So dilution meaning, look, it is really exciting to grow fast in franchising. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into CEOs' offices and they asked me, can we do 100 deals a year? The answer always is yes, with money and people, right? It
Right.
absolutely can happen. But should it happen? And I think for those of us that have been in franchising for a long period of time, we've seen well-capitalized franchises grow too fast and not have the support that should be there on the operational side. And leads to decreased customer loyalty, lack of profitability with franchisees. All the happiness and joy typically tends to pull out and retract from franchisees and then the franchisor because they have frustrated franchisees. And from a franchise development perspective, we need that great validation to be able to continue to grow a franchise
Right.
system. So for me, I think it's a really important balance to also have the quality control and be strategic in growth. Make sure that the support is there to, as I say it, catch the new franchise owners.
Well, and I think that there's just too many stories out there, right? Of, the fastest growing franchisee or franchisor then bombs a year or two later. And, we point to typical, like, the lack of support that was there, or, they didn't know how to scale their teams. I would also say that, with brands that want to grow fast, and I completely understand, and Marcia, I think we're on the same page, right? We understand that you want to grow fast. I see that there's a lack of proof of concept of, you've started with one, it was successful, you're the owner and the founder, right? You're driving the story. And so then when you turn that over to others in different markets or different ownership styles, that's when you're really proving out the concept. It's after those first couple locations. And with that proof of concept comes franchise profitability, which then equals franchisee satisfaction. So I think that in addition to kind of understanding what it costs to operate a franchise successfully, understanding what are your metrics for a proof of concept that's then going to tell you I'm ready to put the jet fuel behind it. Marianne, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to add my hot take to this while we're here, because
Okay.
it's amazing how we are all like dancing around the same thing, and I'm going to call it private equity done wrong. Right? So that it has been such a hot topic for the last 18 months, and done wrong. Let me preface it first by saying franchisees who buy into a brand are ultimately responsible for their contribution to the brand and growing their business, regardless, right? But private equity done wrong and not done strategically, as Marcia had said, can become the very mechanism that most franchisees fled, right? It becomes the corporate structure that most franchisees fled to go into their own business.
Interesting.
They lose their identity. And it could be any influx of speed growth or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The franchisees can lose their identity and their passion for the brand, why the brand was born in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And then they again start to feel like just a number, just a churn. You only want my dollar. It depends on how it's structured, and it should be strategic. So what I love to see is when private equity or any influx of capital comes in and has a strategic plan and then backs themselves up, because typically they're not familiar with franchising, right? A lot of them are coming in, they're not familiar with franchising, and they don't do the homework to study the brand, and they forget what the lifeblood of that brand was to start with, and they kind of suck the soul out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it leads to what Marcia's talking about. They get on a roll and they're just like, boom, 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 look at us, we're growing, but it's not healthy, right? And as you said, Catherine, what was hot today is just a number. And it also feeds very, very much into the public perception that franchises are not local businesses. And we know they are. And that's a big challenge that a lot of small business owners, small franchises face every day in their marketplace.
Yeah. Marianne, I think that's so interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way, as far as, the franchisee is exiting usually a, larger corporate structure to then, go out on their own, right? And so when franchises get to a certain maturation point, you start to mirror that corporate structure again. And so you may be causing some unintended negative consequence with your franchisees, because your infrastructure is now mirroring what they were trying to exit. That's a really interesting point of view.
And I think it goes to another piece that Marcia taught, is like scaling and the franchise growing with their legacy, right? Are you bringing value? What's your value proposition for your legacy franchises? Everybody's very focused on growth and new and stores and all that other kind of stuff. But then you have existing businesses that can get left in the dust, right? They could be great performers, but they don't feel like they're being paid attention to. What is the next step for them? What are you bringing to the table for them? You know how to start up new businesses, get those open, run those, all that kind of stuff. But now you got your other people up here. What are you doing for them?
That I just, all of the knowledge that you just dropped, it just is blowing my mind. I think that is just it's a non-marketing way of looking at things. And so I love the perspective of really digging in and understanding what is that value, what is the franchisee as our, the franchisee is our customer, right? That's where we start as a franchisor, is that our franchisee is our first customer. So how do we keep that in the front of our mind in their own journey with us? We map out customer journeys all the time. Are we mapping out our franchisee's journey and understanding where we're providing value at each point of that? That's awesome.
Yeah. And as a franchisor, are you ahead or behind, right? Are you trying to catch up to your franchisees, or are you ahead of them and anticipating that growth? And you brought up a really great point about the marketing, because typically when you have legacy franchises and they're older, they've been in your system, they've been your loyalty, marketing plays a key role. So you can look to your marketing team to bring some of the better assets to those legacy brands. Like, what can we do from a marketing perspective that we normally couldn't do when we were a younger brand, right? What can we do for these? And a lot of times it comes through marketing, whether you're doing cooperatives or whether you're doing other things.
Yep.
What can the marketing team be the integral part that helps boost these legacy brands and make them feel valued?
Yeah, and you know, you're bringing up a point that I at a conversation I recently had where, you know, there at that point of brand maturation, you're get as a marketer, you are getting to do things that you don't typically do when you're setting the foundation for brands. And so it becomes an exciting time in a brand's journey when your marketing team can really get creative on sponsorships and, you know, activations and experiential marketing activities. So, you know, it's also fun for your team when you reach that point.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, my hot take today is on kind of boring, but it's on naming conventions. When you are establishing your brand, it is important to decide how you are going to refer to your franchisees, and it needs to be something that is scalable to 1,000 locations. It cannot be the city name. It cannot be the corner of corner. It's got to be, in my opinion, it's best to be a number or some sort of, numeric, just do a number and everybody's happy. But the problem is that, you know, you start off with 10 and you've got them all around the country. So they all have city names. And then you go to build systems and now you've got, you know, Atlanta South and Atlanta North, and you know, it just is terrible. And I, you know, right now, you know, I'm seeing it in the building of systems where you're setting up your back end operating system, and if you do it by the LLC name or, you know, some other nomenclature, it really doesn't allow you to build the connections and integrations that you need to be successful and to have a successful marketing tech stack. So just use numbers, people.
And well, you know, I think there's two sides to that. And I was just talking to somebody this morning about this and that's why the marketing team is so integral in the nomenclature and developing and what that looks like. And I'm gonna, can I name bomb somebody?
If you're the one
Sure.
that's gonna get in trouble.
I'm gonna go back to my housemaster days. And I had a franchise, and we used numbers back in those days. You know, each franchise had a number. And this is way before digital. So there was no internet to put people on, you know. But I had a franchisee who was like one of my all-time favorites. His name was Joe Boyle. He was in South Carolina. And every time I would call him, he'd go, and if he knew it was me, he'd go, "This is Joe Boyle, number 113 in your heart." And that was how we spoke. And to this, like if I ran into him on the street, he would say that again. I'm number 113 in your heart.
Oh my God, that's so cute.
Right. And it just stuck. So then the advent of the digital space, right? And the ability, you know, you're out of the yellow pages. So what are you doing? And it is hard. It's very difficult. And so I think that's where the marketing teams get creative on either microsites or whatever, but everybody should be operating under, I don't necessarily believe in using numbers in your visuals.
Collateral. Right.
Right. But internally, it absolutely works because you're trying to keep track of business names. It's like, that's crazy. But then I think that's where the marketing expertise is so critical on how you're grabbing those individual markets and where it's going.
Yes, for sure. Marcia, do you have a preference, city name or numbers?
It's interesting that this just came up in a conversation last week with one of our clients that has under 20 franchise locations. And they did the thing that a lot of younger startup franchises do, and everybody was named by a city. And guess what? The great fractional franchise development people brought in another franchisee in the same town. So now what are we going to do?
Exactly. Exactly.
So we had the same suggestion of numbers. And then we said, you know, go to your marketing team to help, because they couldn't wrap their minds around, well, if I'm a number, then what about my microsite, my collateral? Right. And we said, go to your marketing team and have them help out with.
We will figure it out. That's right. All right, well, before we jump into our question, I am going to do a little bit of a plug, so bear with me. Dear Frannie is brought to you by Franchise Fractionals. Scaling your franchise doesn't mean going it alone. With Franchise Fractionals, you have access to the top tier talent you need when you need it. From finance to operations and marketing, our fractional executives have been where you want to go. Don't let the full-time commitment of executive roles hold you back. Visit franchisefractionals.com today to discover how our leaders can help pave the way for your franchise's success. Because here at Dear Frannie, we're all about bringing you insights that matter and leadership that drives growth. All right, there's my shameless plug. Okay, so we're going to jump into our question of the day. I am going to just read it out as it was shared with me, and then we'll jump right into sharing our feedback. So our first question is, I've just started my first round of renewals with franchisees. It's not going as well as I expected, and I am caught off guard. Is there anything I can do to get ahead of this? And as a warning to others, what should I have done differently so that I wouldn't be caught by surprise today? Okay, so renewals, to me is, we talked about this a little bit in our hot takes when you're a hot brand, when, everyththing's rolling and you're selling, it is sometimes hard to remember you have to renew these folks in 7 to 10 years, depending on your franchise agreement. So that's a whole next kind of step in your growth trajectory. And having a strategy around those renewals can be really important. With the experience that you guys bring to the table, I'm excited to get started. And this time I'll start with Marianne because Marcia started first for our other two activities. So I'll start with Marianne to find out what she thinks about this process.
Yeah, and Marcia and I have discussed this over the years, back and forth on different things. But rule number one, first and foremost, is, are your franchisees profitable? That's rule number one. What is the unit level economics in your system? Because non-renewals should not be, it shouldn't be a guessing game, and so it comes down, and it's good leadership that's going to bring it to the table. So rule number one is, what are the unit level economics? And then the rest of it is communication, right? Are you communicating? I mean, there's the software aspect of renewals, right? So your administrative team, you should have good software that tells you a renewal is coming up. That's kind of a given. But if it's not in your system, you should definitely have something that provides a tick, like your anniversaries, and you should be recognizing anniversaries all the time anyway, right? So that type of thing, but then drops down immediately to unit level economics, and whether or not those franchises are profitable. If they're not, you're going to find challenges at renewal. And you'll know, because if you look at if you're collecting your P&Ls, as you should be, because P&Ls are meant to help growth and health, not because you're doing an audit and your franchisees are stealing from you. No. P&Ls are meant to support growth and health of your franchisees and then the overall business.
So let's dig in, Marianne, to that piece a little bit more on, you're absolutely right. It shouldn't be a surprise if your renewals aren't going well, because if they're not making money with you, they don't want to continue. So, before it gets to that point, what are some things that the franchisor should be looking for or doing to either, I guess where I'm going, where my head goes, it jumps to, okay, if they're not making money for themselves, they're not making money for you either. And so you either need to move them on proactively and find a buyer, or you need to get proactive and establish some plans to get them making money as soon as possible. And so how far out would you look for that, and what kind of programs might you think about?
So this is it's I'm going to call it an engagement challenge, and an engagement issue, right? And it's an engagement between the franchisor and the franchisee and all of the things that happen. Franchise, and we always, looked at it in the businesses that I have been in, franchisees that don't participate in either regional, local, group, national conferences, phone calls, updates and things like that are your highest risk. They're not engaged. They don't know what's going on. And they always are the ones that will say, well, I'm not getting anything out of this, and we all know that you get out of it what you put into it. And franchisees are an important voice in every business, you depending on if you've got an advisory council or whatever your structure is, checking your communications along the line, who's reading, who's participating. And if somebody's not participating, your business coach should be digging in. And it could go all the way up to your executive leadership. It's like, hey, President Bob, can you give Fred and Diana a call? They haven't been in, they've canceled their last 3 meetings with me. Would you reach out to them? I can't get to the bottom of it, and a call from you would be helpful. So it's like profitability, and then looking at communication and engagement. Who's in, who's doing it, because you're going to hear the good and the bad. So you're almost taking a pulse on an ongoing basis. And then to layer onto that is, what type of pulse measurements are you using, right? Are you using, or even just doing a little, survey monkey? If you're a small brand, you can just do a survey monkey. Hey, you know what? How's this working out for you? What, if you could pick one thing, what would it be? Right? So there's a lot of different ways to keep and encourage these ideas bubbling up.
Yeah.
A lot of franchisees feel like they don't have a say, and they do. But it's an advisory say. Can we do everything at once? No. But
right.
Every franchise system will tell you that their best ideas, for the most part, have come from their franchisees.
Right.
Not all at once. But again, once they bubble up, you can parse them, monetize them, test them, and put them into the system, and everybody feels heard.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned some kind of low-tech ways of getting that engagement up. That's awesome. Marcia, what are you thinking when it comes to this question about renewals and how to set your system up so that they're not caught off guard?
So I obviously my brain always goes to franchise development, but piggybacking off of some of the conversation you guys were having there, and then I'll go to the franchise development piece. I was thinking the same thing. Like if the franchisor is not formally or informally surveying their franchisees for feedback on an annual basis, that's a really big miss in a franchise system. There's gold standard, amazing services out there in franchising to do that work for a franchisor. But to Marianne's point, there's really inexpensive ways to do it too. And you can even come up with go to your IT department and come up with a creative way for people to submit feedback where they feel like it's a safe place, right? I think, when you asked the question that I was thinking so much about when you first asked this about a renewal process. Nobody should be surprised. It's like the first rule of selling. You don't ask for a sale unless you know the answer. And you shouldn't ask a franchisee to renew if you don't know what their answer is going to be. If it's not going to be a resounding yes, good gracious, I'm so excited to pay my fee and sign for another, I'm just going to use 10 years as a number, but it could be different for some ZORs. If you don't know what that answer is going to be, you shouldn't ask it. And the renewal process really should start 3 years before somebody's document is coming up to expire, because it could take a minimum of 3 or 4 months for the actual process. Let's think if it's around this time of year, and in the springtime in franchising, we have renewals of our franchise documents, and that can really slow things down, especially if somebody's in a registration state. So it should be a multi-year process. And to your point earlier, if somebody's not happy and they want to get out of the franchise system, there's 1 to 2 years of preparations that should go into positioning a business well to sell, and then go to the franchise development department or your outside resource for actively selling and transitioning a franchise, so that franchise owner can honorably exit something that's just not working out for them. And I'll go back all the way to the beginning, discovery process. And I spoke about this at the Let's Grow conference earlier this year. One of the really important steps of a discovery process is for an executive team member to interview a franchise candidate. And in that meeting, not only should the executive be qualifying and really understanding if this person would be a good fit for the franchise system, but they should also be setting expectations of the role of the franchisee and the relationship between the franchisee and the franchisor and the culture of that organization. And as Marianne said, when you elevate, an operations person that can't get a hold of a franchisee, that's not participating, they're not being active, when that gets elevated back up to that executive that had that conversation before the person even signed a franchise document, they can pull out the notes from that meeting and go right back to, hey, we actually talked about hard times, and here's what we said was going to happen when we had hard times. And have a really real conversation with the person that if the franchisor is not happy, the franchisee is probably not happy, and then the franchisor is not happy, right? Nobody's happy. Let's figure out how to get aligned again.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, that as humans, I think that we often don't connect those two things of, if I'm not happy, then the person I'm not happy with is probably not happy with me either. And I think that's such a basic aha moment for people to have, to say, okay, if we're not happy with each other, how can we change this? And, you know, Marcia, I think that the process that you just outlined is such a hack of, and not a shortcut, right? Because you're saying, you know, you need time in the process, but it saves you time later on if you're setting yourself up for success 3 years before your renewals come due. And look, as a new brand, you're going to have a crop of renewals at the same time. You know, as you grow, you're going to have, you know, them trickle in, and it's going to be a little bit more manageable. But that first turn is a beast, and you do need to have a handle on who's turning with you and who's not. And I would say too that renewals are a great opportunity for a renewed buy-in on where the brand is at that point, because, you know, the folks who buy in on as early adopters who are building this brand with you, once you get to that 10-year mark, hopefully you're in a different life stage of your brand, and it might be time for them to move on, because they are early adopters, they are pioneers, and they know they need to go pioneer with someone else because you're not in that life stage anymore. And so, you know, getting ahead of that and having a plan and a vision for who you want to bring with you to your next stage, and how to gracefully exit those who, you know, probably feeling mutual disenfranchisement, I think is a really great way of getting ahead of that. And, you know, I think that what I see is that those resources are hard to commit to, because you're working someone you already have, right? And so it's hard to say, like, okay, let me put resources into really managing this process versus resources going into selling more franchises. Marianne, have you seen brands in that?
Yeah, so it's funny because as you're saying this, Marcia, and I never understood this until like I went through like many, many years ago, a renewal, you know, kerfluffle, right? And it's where things get, it's a lack of continuity, right? Nobody should come into a brand without an exit strategy. You shouldn't buy something without your exit strategy. And that should come out in Discovery Day. Why are you buying this business? But I think then those particular notes never, like you said, the CEO can just pull out the notes and it's like, well, where are they? You know? And then those notes never translate down to the franchise business coaches who are working with them on a business plan. So we, you know, operations people work on the business plan with the franchisee. So if you're in like year 7 of a 10-year contract and you're doing a 3-year business plan, well, that plan has got to have either the exit strategy in it or the renewal strategy in it. So, and I think for the most part that gets lost and is not a key piece of information, because 10 years is a heartbeat in franchising. It is a second. It goes so fast, right? So I think if you're not going backwards to go forwards, meaning like when you're doing your business planning, back it up. Why are we here again? Here's what we did. Here's our 1 year, 3 year, 10-year. But if you're in year 7 on a 10-year contract, like, okay, what are we doing for the next 3 years to prep this business to sell? Because it doesn't happen overnight. To prep it to sell, our books are in order, our books are clean. We're going to make, you know, the best value. Or it's like, holy cow, I want to stay. Great. Yeah. And the second part of that is, though, where there could be a little bit of shock. And this is why you want to get this out in front of franchisees early. A contract, your franchise agreement at year 10 is very different than it was at year 1 when you launched it. So they're looking at something that's like, what is all of this? Yep. You know, oh my gosh, what do you mean I have to, you know, do all these things, right? So it can be a shock. So that they were not caught up on, because they're not buying, they're not renewing every year. So they're not seeing these contracts every year. So that shock effect is like, whoa. So how quickly can you get that in front of them? But that's part of the engagement too. So if they understand what all the new people coming in are doing, they have a better idea of where they're at in the mix. Like it is age old when you go to a convention and a franchisee who hasn't been there or missed a year, they're like, when did all that happen? Yep. They do it all the time.
But that's such a great call out of, you know, just remind yourself, yes, you've been working on this contract every single year, but this franchisee has seen it for the first time in whatever, you know, 5-10 years. And how are you selling in the things? Because obviously, you know, your fees are going up because your support's going up. And so how are you selling that in throughout the time of that? And then, you know, starting with the end in mind, you know, we talk to, when Marianne, I'm sure you have this conversation all the time when talking to founders about their emerging brand, but carrying that through to the franchisee of, okay, when we asked you to start with the end in mind, we're coming to that end. Have we achieved our goals? And I think that's super smart. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, guys, you guys have killed it on this question. I think that you know, folks listening are truly going to take away some proactive ways that they can stay ahead of renewals, and then, you know, some pitfalls that a lot of franchisors fall into. So thank you guys so much for sharing, and we will see you guys next time on Dear Frannie.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine.